My father thought one text would put me back where he liked me: quiet, useful, available. What he did not understand was that I had spent years doing the kind of work families never name out loud. I was the one who made things run smoother than they deserved to. I remembered birthdays. I booked dinners. I brought the right gift, called at the right time, softened the sharp comment, filled the silence, cleaned up the feel. And because I did it so well, they started treating it like my natural position. Not generous, not loving, just expected. So when my father sent that message in the family group chat the week of my mother's birthday, he probably imagined I would do what I had always done: take the hit, stay calm, find a way to make the whole thing easier for everyone else. Instead, I went still. Not dramatic stillness. Not the kind that comes when something in you finally stops negotiating with reality. I was standing in line at a coffee shop outside Austin, half awake, checking emails before my first client meeting of the day. When my phone lit up, it was the family thread. I opened it, expecting the usual mess about dinner timing, flowers, parking, and who was bringing what. My mother's birthday was that Friday, and I had reserved a private room at a restaurant she liked, worked out the menu, paid the deposit, made sure the whole evening would look polished enough for the photos she would absolutely post afterward. No one had formally asked me to do all that. They rarely had to in my family. I was the person people counted on before they admitted they were counting on me. Then I read my father's message. Don't come Friday. The whole family doesn't want you there. For once, stop making everything about you. And then, because cruelty in my family always liked one extra turn of the knife, he added that maybe, and this was why I was still a loser, with a little business instead of a real place in the world. I stared at the screen long enough for the woman behind me to step around and order before I realized the line had moved. I did not feel shocked. The way people expect you to feel in stories like this, shock would have meant surprise. What I felt was recognition. Because the truth is, that text did not create anything new. It only stripped the politeness off something that had already been living underneath my family for years. My father had been punishing me for a long time. He just usually preferred cleaner packaging. His name is Robert, and he is the kind of man who mistakes control for leadership because too many people have rewarded him for it. He made money in real estate, talked like certainty, was the same thing as intelligence, built his whole identity around being the person in the room who decided what counted. If he approved of something, it had value. If he did not, it was sentimental, unserious, or beneath him. My older sister, Megan, learned early how to thrive inside that system. She worked in luxury real estate, dressed like expensive restraint, knew how to turn agreement into status. My mother admired her. Megan always seemed to know exactly how close to power she could stand without ever getting burned by it. Then there was Hannah, my younger sister, who hated conflict so much, she treated silence like innocence. Hannah would text sympathy in private after I got cut down in public. She was the family's soft witness. Never the one holding the knife, never the one grabbing it away. Either my mother, Eleanor, was harder to explain to people outside the family. On paper, warm voice, nice smile, thoughtful notes, in birthday cards. But her version of peace always protected the person causing the harm. She never asked the strongest person in the room to be gentler. She asked the person already bleeding to be more understanding. And me? I was the one who made things easier. To live inside, I own a home staging and interior styling company, not glamorous by my family standards, not loud enough, not expensive enough, not male enough, but it was real. I built it, one client at a time, while raising 2 kids, managing a house, and trying not to let my family's opinion of me sink too deep into my bones. To outsiders, my work looked creative. To my father, it looked decorative, temporary, a side project with invoices. He never said that when other people were listening. Of course, in public, he liked sounding supportive. In private, he called it my little thing. About a year before my mother's birthday, he tried to fold my company into one of his development projects. He pitched it like a favor. He always did. He said I could oversee interiors for a high-end property group he was backing. He said it like he was finally offering me legitimacy. What he was really offering me was absorption. His money, his timeline, his clients, his rules, my taste, my labor, my eye, my name, just not my independence. When I told him no, I watched his face change in a way I had seen before, not offense, as if refusing his plan was a form of disrespect, as if autonomy itself was an insult. When practiced by someone he still expected to outrank. After that, the comments sharpened. Megan started making little observations about how emotional people cap their own growth. My mother asked why I always had to make things harder than they needed to be. My father said pride was expensive for people who had less room to play with. They even found ways to diminish because he taught high school history and had never shown much interest in competing for the kind of polished, status-heavy life my parents worshipped in my family. A calm man with principles somehow counted as less impressive than a louder man with better branding. But Michael saw them clearly. That was one of the reasons I married him. He had spent years standing beside me through dinners and those moments after the drive home when I would stare out the passenger window and say, maybe I'm being too sensitive, in a tone that already knew I wasn't. So in that coffee shop, with my father's message still open in my hand, I did not call my mother. I did not text Megan. I did not ask Hannah what had happened. I typed one sentence into the group chat, just to be clear. Dad, Are you really choosing control over your own daughter in front of everyone? Then I canceled the dinner reservation, the private room, the menu request, the arrangements. I had already paid toward every invisible piece that would have allowed that family to walk into a beautiful evening and pretend they had built it together. A few seconds later, reactions started popping up. Under the thread, a laugh. A stupide comment. One of those breezy little replies people use when they want to hide cruelty. And that was the moment I understood something I should have admitted to myself a long time ago. They did not think they were risking me. They thought I would stay enroll no matter what. They thought I would still come back, still smooth it over, still help them climb out of the ugliness they had created, because that had always been my function in that family. I made things look more loving than they were. Once I saw that clearly, I stopped feeling the need to defend myself. I walked back to my car with my coffee untouched and sat behind the steering wheel. Without starting the engine, people moved in and out of the shop around me. A delivery truck backed up somewhere nearby. Someone laughed in the parking lot. Normal morning sounds. Ordinary life continuing, like the ground under mine, had not just shifted, but it had, not because my father had humiliated me. He had been trying to do that for years. It shifted because I stopped confusing endurance with love. I saw the structure clearly. My father did not hate me because I had failed. My family did not resent me because I was difficult. They resented the part of me they could not absorb, the part that still belonged to me, the part that kept building a life they did not authorize, did not finance, and could not fully direct. And if that was true, then this was bigger than a birthday dinner. This was about access, my emotional flexibility, my willingness to step back into the old role every time someone in my family decided comfort mattered more than truth. I sat there long enough to feel one decision take shape before I had the words for it. I was done making myself smaller just to keep other people comfortable. Not done being hurt. Not done understanding everything. Just done volunteering for the same wound. When Michael was in the kitchen grading papers with his glasses low on his nose and a red pen in his hand. He looked up once and knew something had happened. Before I said a word, I handed him my phone. He read the messages slowly. Read my reply. Set the phone down on the counter. Then he looked at me and asked the only question that mattered. What do you want to do now? Not what should we do? Not how do we calm this down? What do you want to do now? I leaned against the counter and told him the truth. Before fear could clean it up. I think I'm done carrying people who only love me. When I make their lives easier. Michael held my gaze for a second and nodded. Then stopped carrying them. That was all he said. No speech. No rescue. Just the kind of permission that only matters because it meets something already waking up inside you. While the family probably still assumed I would circle back and repair the damage for them. I had already started moving my hands toward a different life. Not revenge. Not drama. Just removal. Because they thought they had pushed me out of one dinner. What they had actually done was force me to see what happened when the woman holding The next morning, I woke up before my alarm and knew the situation had changed. In a way, my family still did not understand. Not because my father had gone too far. He had gone too far before, not because I was suddenly stronger than I had ever been. The change was simpler than that. I believed myself now. That sounds smaller than it is. But if you have spent enough years inside a family where your role is to absorb discomfort and call believing your own experience feels almost rebellious. It means the old questions, it stopped working. Was it really that bad? Maybe he didn't mean it like that. Maybe I'm taking it too personally. Maybe I should be the bigger person. That whole script had lived in me for years. Efficient, familiar, almost automatic. My family did not even have to say those lines anymore. I had learned to say them for them. But after that message in the group chat, something broke. In a useful way, I could still feel hurt. But I could no longer pretend I was confused. And once confusion left, the entire family dynamic started looking less emotional and more mechanical. My father pushed. My mother softened the edges. Megan translated control into something polished enough to sound reasonable. Hannah watched, flinched, and stayed quiet. And I stepped in to make sure nothing collapsed. All the way, I did not just help. I stabilized. I made holidays smoother. I made conversations recoverable. I handled details people forgot and emotions people did not want to deal with. I brought gifts, organized dinners, checked on people, followed up, remembered what mattered, and filled in the invisible labor that lets a family keep pretending it is warmer than it really is. The worst part was that I genuinely thought I was contributing something good. I thought I was being loving, thoughtful, reliable. I thought if I kept showing up with enough consistency and enough grace, eventually the relationship would become as honest as the effort I kept pouring into it. But effort does not soften people who benefit from your overfunctioning. It usually just trains them to expect it. That morning, after Michael left for school, I sat at the kitchen table with coffee and opened my laptop. I was supposed to be reviewing in a client mood board for a dining room install in Westlake. Instead, I made a list. Cancel the remaining birthday items. Move the restaurant refund into business savings. If possible, update client calendar. Call Sophia. Review current contracts. Stop responding reflexively. The last one was the hardest because silence can look simple from the outside, but silence is work. Every unanswered text feels like a door you were trained to reopen. Every hour you do not explain yourself feels like you are breaking some old unwritten law. My phone buzzed twice. Before 9. First, Hannah. Hey, I just saw everything. I'm so sorry. I didn't know he was going to do that. Then my mother, I don't want this week ruined over a misunderstanding. There it was, right on schedule. No, I'm sorry that happened. No, no, you didn't deserve that. Just the familiar family reflex. Reduce the injury, manage the optics, restore the schedule. I put the phone face down and stared at it for a second. That was when I understood my mother's role more clearly than I ever had before. She was not the opposite of my father. She was the softer arm of the same system. He used force. She used emotional smoothing. Different style, same outcome, keep the truth. I did not reply to either message. Instead, I called Sophia Bennett. Sophia and I had known each other since college, back when both of us were certain our lives would look much more expensive by 35 and much easier by 38. She had gone into branding and digital strategy, mostly working with small businesses that had outgrown their original look, but not their own self-image yet. For 2 years, she had been telling me the same thing in slightly different ways. Your work is stronger than your presentation. She was right. My company was steady, profitable, and respected by the clients who actually hired me, but online, it still looked smaller than it was. My website was outdated. My portfolio undersold the warmth and precision of my work. My intake process felt handmade in the charming sense, but also handmade in the way that makes people assume you are still playing small. That morning, I called her and said, I'm ready. Ready for what? She just said, okay, tell me how serious enough to stop looking modest online, just because I was taught not to take up too much space. There was a beat of silence, on her end. Then one soft laugh. Well, she said, that is the most useful sentence you've ever said to me. By the end of the call, we had a plan, new site architecture, better visuals, client testimonials, video content, a cleaner booking path, tighter, just a version of my business that finally matched the level I had already been working at. When I hung up, I realized I felt something that had been missing from me for a long time. Momentum. My family always assumed that if they withheld approval, I would stall out emotionally until they gave some of it back. But the opposite was happening. The less I reached toward them, the more energy I had for my actual life. That afternoon, I drove to a staging consult in a quiet neighborhood with wide sidewalks and expensive mailboxes. And for the first time in years, I stopped narrating myself through my family's eyes, not, this is cute, but Megan's work is more impressive. Not, Dad would never call this a real business. Not, Mom would say, at least it keeps me busy. Just the house, the client, the light, the flow of the practical decisions that make people feel safe enough to imagine a future in a place they have just walked into. I was good at my job. It sounds obvious, but saying it cleanly, without apology or defense, felt newer than it should have. By the time I got home, Megan had texted, "This has gone far enough. Mom is upset. Dad was out of line. But you know how he gets, please don't make this bigger. than it already is. I read it once and laughed. Not because it was, but because it was so predictable. Megan's gift had always been the ability to relabel power in a tone that sounded mature. She could take humiliation, erase the center of it, and hand you back a cleaner narrative where your reaction became the real disruption. I did not answer her. Either that night, after dinner, when the kids were upstairs and the house had finally gone quiet, Michael found me on the couch, staring at nothing, with my phone in my lap. He sat that was one of the kindest things about him. He did not rush to fill silence just because it existed. After a minute, I said, I think the part that bothers me most is that none of this surprised me. Michael nodded. Yeah, he said. That's usually the sign? The sign of what? That you've been treated badly for a long time. It was such an unadorned sentence. No drama. No overreach. Just truth set on the table, where I could finally look at it. Without dressing it up, I leaned my head back and closed my eyes. I keep thinking, maybe I should answer somebody. To do what? Set the record straight. Tell them what actually happened. Tell them I paid for the room and the menu and all of it. Tell them Dad doesn't get to speak for everyone. Tell Mom this isn't a misunderstanding. Michael was quiet for a moment. Then he said, do you think they don't know? Or do you think they don't want to say it out loud? Because he was right. My family's problem was never lack of information. It was lack of willingness. They knew who did the work, knew who got diminished, knew who smoothed things over after every holiday and every passive-aggressive dinner and every little wound that was supposed to count as normal because nobody had raised their voice enough to make it official. Naming a pattern out loud would have forced all of them to choose a side, and families like mine love moral ambiguity when clarity might cost them comfort. So instead of answering anyone, I did something that would have looked unremarkable to most people and almost radical to mine. I got quiet. I did not leave the group chat. I did not write a long paragraph. I did not post something cryptic online so the right people would ask questions. I did not perform injury. I just stopped supplying access. The next day, my mother texted again. No matter what happens, I'm still your mother. I stared at it for a while because in my family, titles had always been used like evidence. Mother, father, sister. As if the role itself should cancel the behavior inside it. I set the phone down and went back to work. Later that afternoon, while I was sourcing rugs for a client and answering, I caught myself noticing how much more peaceful my own mind felt when I was not spending half of it predicting my family's moods. That should not feel like relief, but it did, and relief can be clarifying. Over the next few days, Sophia moved fast. She sent over a rough timeline, a photographer recommendation, and a short list of questions that made me think about my business in a new way. What do clients say? What feeling does your work create that people don't get from colder luxury staging. What do you actually want your business to look like if you stop presenting it to survive other people's judgment? That last question stayed with me because the answer reached further than branding. What would my life look like if I stopped presenting it for survival, not my business? My whole life, what if I stopped arranging myself to remain acceptable inside a system that had never been interested in seeing me clearly in the first place? That weekend, my father still did not call. That told me everything. A man waiting for his daughter to bend first, because that was how the system had always corrected itself before. He did not need to apologize because he did not think the rupture itself was the problem. Disobedience was, on Sunday night, I stood in the kitchen, rinsing plates, while Michael dried them beside me. I think this is bigger than the birthday, I said. Michael handed me a plate. I know. I mean, really bigger? He looked at me. How big? I dried my hands and leaned against the counter, big enough that I don't think I can go back to the way it was, even if they pretend none of this happened. He set the towel down. Good. I laughed a little. That sounded fast. It's not fast, he said. It's because that was the feeling underneath everything now. Not that I was blowing up my life over one cruel family incident, that I had tolerated a structure for too long because it came wrapped in familiar names. And once I admitted that, the next decision started taking shape behind it. I was not ready to say it out loud yet. Not fully, but I had begun to understand something my family had never expected from me. If I stopped using all my strength to stay connected to them, I would have enough strength left to build something else. The first real sign that I meant it was not a speech. It was direction. Once I stopped wasting energy on whether my family would finally understand me, that energy started going somewhere else. Into work, into planning, into the house, into my kids, into the parts of my life that had been carrying real weight all along, while I kept treating family approval like a second full-time job. Sophia had a photographer booked. She had me walking through one of my staging jobs while somebody trailed me with a camera, catching the details. I usually moved through too quickly to notice the way I adjusted a lamp half an inch, because balance matters, even when people cannot explain why. The way I opened curtains, just enough to make a room feel generous, instead of exposed. The way I layered warmth into a space without making it look decorated for show. I had spent, now I was finally letting it be seen. That shift did something to me almost immediately. I did not wake up suddenly fearless. I still flinched. When my phone lit up, I still felt the old pull to explain myself, but each hour I invested in my actual life made my family's version of me feel thinner. By the end of that first week, my mother's birthday dinner had come and gone. I did not ask anyone how it went. I did not need to, not because people are honest, but because discomfort rarely stays contained as neatly as the people causing it want. The first message came from Hannah. Can we talk? No emoji. No softener. No vague family language. Just 4 words. I looked at the screen for a while before answering. About what? A minute later, she wrote back, about Friday, about all of it. It was bad. I read that twice and set the phone down. Not because I was shocked the dinner had gone badly. It was bad. Not awkward. Not tense. Not weird. Bad. That night, after the kids were in bed, I sat at the dining table with my laptop open, half working, half waiting to see if she would say more. She did. Apparently, a few relatives had shown up expecting the kind of polished dinner my mother had been hinting about for weeks. The private room she mentioned, the custom menu she had bragged about, the little elevated touches that make an event feel expensive and intentional, even when the family inside it is neither. Except none of that was there. The reservation was smaller. The setup was ordinary. Staff had no idea what special requests my mother thought had been made. At some point, one of my aunts had asked where I was because she assumed I was the reason the room looked wrong. And once that question entered the room, the whole performance started slipping, because there is a big difference between a family being difficult in private and a family being exposed as ungrateful in public. People can ignore cruelty for years if it stays inside the house, but once it disrupts the image, suddenly everyone starts noticing details. Who actually did the work? Who always hosts? Who smooths things over? Who gets talked about differently when they are not in? Hannah said our mother, it tried to act like none of it mattered. But she looked rattled all night. Megan got irritated with the staff over things that were not their fault. Tyler, Megan's husband, made one of his dumb little jokes about drama, and nobody laughed. My father got quieter as the night went on, which for him was usually a sign of control slipping, not reflection. I did not feel triumphant reading any of that. Sophia sent over the first round of new site copy, cleaner language, better structure, more confident positioning. She had pulled quotes from old clients I had never taken seriously enough, things people had said in passing. After a project wrapped, you made the house feel human again. You saw what it could be. Before I did, your work doesn't feel cold. It feels lived in the best way. One line in particular stayed with me. Warm. I sat with that phrase longer than I expected, because it described my work, and in a way, I was only just beginning to admit it described the life I wanted too. Warm, honest, steady, the opposite of what my family had always confused with success. That same afternoon, Megan texted again. Mom is devastated. You've made your point. There it was. Not Dad was cruel. Not we should talk about what happened. Not just the old assumption that my silence was a strategy in a game. They were still controlling. I did not answer. A few days later, Hannah asked if we could meet in person, not at my house, not at hers. Somewhere quiet, I almost said no. Not because I was afraid of her, because I was tired of being the place people came to unload their conscience after doing nothing useful with it. But something in her messages felt different this time. So we met at a coffee shop near the lake on the other side of town. She was already there when I walked in, sitting by the window with both hands around a paper cup, like she needed the heat just to keep herself in place. She looked tired, not dramatic, not wrecked, just like somebody who had spent too long standing near a truth she did not want to touch. When she saw me, she stood halfway, then sat back down. I took the chair across from her. For a second, then Hannah looked at me and said, "You were right." I waited. She swallowed, glanced down at her drink, and started talking. She said the dinner had felt wrong from the start. Mom kept talking too much, smiling too hard, acting like if she performed fine, aggressively enough, no one would notice anything under it. Dad stayed colder than usual. Megan kept getting irritated because details were off, small things. But visible, the flow of the evening, people kept asking questions that had easy answers. If everyone were willing to tell the truth, and awkward answers if they were not, where was I? Hadn't I been planning the dinner? Wasn't there supposed to be a private room? Didn't your mother say something about a custom menu? Hannah said every question made the table tighter. And then she told me the part that mattered most, nobody voted on that text. She said quietly, "Dad just sent it." I felt something inside me go very still, not because it surprised me. Somewhere under the hurt, I had already suspected it, but hearing it out loud changed the shape of the wound. The whole family doesn't want you there. He had used all of them as a shield, borrowed the authority of the group to make his control sound unanimous, made the cruelty look collective so I would feel more alone inside it. I looked at Hannah and said, "Did anybody stop him?" Her eyes filled immediately. No. That landed harder. Not because I needed one person to save me, but because silence, when it gathers around you from enough directions, starts trying to pass itself off as truth. Hannah kept going. A couple of relatives had clearly realized I was the one who had arranged the nicer version of the dinner. Mom tried to minimize it. Megan got defensive. Dad acted like I was overreacting to something small. The more they tried to act like nothing serious had happened. Then Hannah said something I do not think she realized would matter. As much as it did, we all thought you'd come back. I leaned back in my chair and let that sit between us because it was honest. Cruel. But honest, the whole family system had been built around one assumption: I would absorb the injury and return, I would be hurt, then reasonable, excluded, then helpful, humiliated, then available. And the second I refused that role, Hannah started crying then. Real crying, the kind that comes when someone has finally gotten too close to their own cowardice to keep calling it kindness. I was scared of Dad, she said, and Megan. And honestly, being next, I believed her. That was the tragedy of Hannah. She was rarely malicious, but fear had made her useful to the same system. Anyway, she wiped at her face and looked at me. They only liked it when you made everything easier. That was close enough to the truth. I looked out the window for a second at the lake beyond the parking lot, flat and bright, under the afternoon sun. And I felt the last thin thread of guilt in me snap. I was not overreacting. I was not making this bigger than it was. I was finally responding to the pattern instead of the excuse. When I looked back at Hannah, I reached across the table and put my hand over hers for just a second. Not forgiveness. I was never the problem in that family. I said. She shook her head immediately. No, she whispered. You were the one keeping it together. There it was. By the time I got back to my car, I was not thinking about repairing anything. I was thinking about distance. Physical distance. My cousin Ben lived in Bend, Oregon. He had cut himself off from most of the family years ago after a messy business situation nobody defended him through. For a long time, I had treated his absence the way families like mine encourage you to treat inconvenient people. As a cautionary tale, a little sad, a little dramatic. Now I understood him better. I called him that night, after dinner. He picked up on the second ring and said, "Well, you finally done?" I laughed. Before I meant to. That told him enough. I gave him the shorter version. The text, the dinner, Hannah, the feeling I could no longer unfeel. Ben did not interrupt. When I was done, I smiled a little at that. You and Michael would get along. Probably, he said. You want sympathy or a plan? A plan? That's what I thought. Then he told me one of his long-term renters was moving out in a couple of months. 4-bedroom house, quiet street, good schools, a detached back space that could work as an office or studio. He said if I was serious, and he could hold it for a little while, but not forever. The old version of me would have treated that too large, too sudden. The version of me sitting in my darkened living room that night heard something else. A door. After I hung up, I stayed there for a long time, listening to the low sounds of the house, the dishwasher running, Michael upstairs, helping Noah find a stuffed shark. He could not sleep without Mia talking to herself in that half-singing voice she used when she was drawing the life my family had always treated like a lesser version of the one they respected. And suddenly, I could see exactly how much I had been risking by staying entangled with them. Not just my own peace, my children's sense of what love sounds like. My daughter's idea of what a woman is allowed to refuse. My son's idea of what family gets to demand. In the name of closeness, when Michael came downstairs, I was still sitting there. How serious are we getting? I looked up at him. For real. I said. He nodded. and sat across from me. Okay. So we started talking logistics. Could he finish the school year and look for remote options? Could I wrap existing client contracts cleanly? What would we sell? I keep, store, donate. What would the kids need first? What could be handled quietly? Before anyone in my family realized this was no longer theoretical, every answer, every question made it feel more real. And the strangest part was this: the more concrete it became, the calmer I felt, not because moving across the country with 2 kids and 2 careers is easy, because once the decision matched the truth, my body stopped fighting itself. Over the next couple of weeks, 2 things happened at the same time. My business started expanding, and my family started circling. Sophia's relaunch work went live in stages. New updated language, cleaner visual identity, more confidence, without more performance. Within weeks, inquiries started picking up, not in a miraculous overnight success way, in a believable way, better fit clients, more referrals, people who understood the difference between expensive and thoughtful. One new client told me she picked me because my work felt warm, not cold, and staged. I thought about that line for the rest of the day. Warm. I wanted my whole life to feel like that. Meanwhile, my mother sent longer texts, memory texts, holiday texts, title texts. No matter what happens, we are still family. I don't know how things got this far. I miss the old you. The old you? Meaning what? The more compliant one? The more reachable one? The one who would swallow the insult and still show up with a gift bag? Megan escalated. 2, she sent a long message about how I was tearing everyone apart over one misunderstanding. How mom was humiliated, how Hannah was overly emotional, how dad was stubborn but old school, how families survive things by choosing perspective. Perspective. That is one of those words people like Megan use when they want to sand all the moral edges off reality until no one can say what happened. In plain English, my father texted exactly once. During that stretch, you are taking this too far. Nothing about his just the same old assumption that he still had the right to define the size of my response to his behavior a month earlier. That text might have sent me spiraling. Now, it just clarified the weather. We started packing in quiet ways. First, a drawer, a closet, the hall cabinet nobody opens until they move and suddenly discovers they've been storing batteries, wrapping paper, dead chargers, and guilt. Transfer records, finish contracts, sort furniture, talk to the bank, map timeline, protect peace. The last one was not a real task. Exactly, more like a rule. Because once a family feels you slipping out of their reach, they rarely get more honest. They usually get more strategic, and that is exactly what happened. Hannah texted asking if I was moving because She had seen a few boxes in the background of a photo I posted from my office. I let it ring. My mother wrote that she had heard a rumor and wanted to know what was going on. Rumor. As if my life were community property the second it moved outside the version of it. They preferred I kept packing. The kids thought it was an adventure. Mia decorated boxes with stars and crooked hearts. Noah wrote his name in giant, uneven letters on everything. Michael wrote, bent a bust on the side of a kitchen box, and there were nights, usually late, when the weight of it hit me. The cost, the distance, the fact that I was dismantling a life room by room because I had finally accepted that staying close to my family came with a version of self-erasure I could not keep calling normal. But even then, I never doubted the direction that was new. A week before, we were set to leave. The conversation had drifted back to its usual surface nonsense. Photos, plans, someone mentioning a summer cookout. No one saying my name. No one naming the rupture. Just the familiar family trick of acting normal, hard enough to make the person who refused the script feel imaginary. I scrolled for maybe 30 seconds. Then I tapped one button and left the chat. No announcement, no paragraph, no final statement. Just exit. My phone started ringing, then Megan, then my mother. I turned the screen face down on the table and kept sealing boxes. By then, this was no longer about whether they understood me. It was about whether I understood myself well enough not to walk back into the same fire just because the people holding the matches had started. By the time we left Texas, the hardest part was not the packing. It was accepting how normal I had once made all of it feel. That was the twist I had not seen clearly at the beginning. I thought the deepest injury was the birthday text. I thought the wound was the humiliation, the public rejection, the way my father had tried to turn the whole family into a wall and press me against it. Once the boxes were unpacked and the air was different and my phone had gone quieter in the specific way it does when people realize they are no longer steering you, I understood something worse and cleaner. The birthday text was not the truth. It was the summary. The truth was everything I had been trained to call normal before that. The little cuts I kept naming wrong, the adjustment, the endless small betrayals that never looked large enough on their own to justify a break, but stacked together into a life that kept asking me to shrink in order to stay loved. That was the real story. Not that my family finally crossed a line, that I had spent years living past it. Ben did not feel dramatic. When we arrived, that was one of the first things I loved about it. It was quiet. The streets near Ben's rental were lined with tall pines and modest yards. The house itself had white walls, too much afternoon light in the best way, and a kitchen window that looked out onto a backyard big enough for the kids to run without me feeling like I had to apologize for taking up space. The detached room in the back became my office before anything else. Got fully settled, not because I was in a rush to prove I could rebuild, because work can be a form of dignity. The kids adapted faster than I expected. Mia found her way into conversation with almost anybody within 10 minutes. If animals, books, or snacks were involved, Noah slept better. Really slept better. The kind of steady sleep that made me realize how much ambient tension children can absorb. Michael found a remote teaching position after a few interviews, and one disappointing offer that would have dragged him back into exactly the kind of drained life we were trying to leave behind. It paid a little less than his old job. It also gave him back something my parents had never respected enough to understand: pace. As for me, the business did not explode. It got truer. That mattered more. Ben introduced me to Sophia, helped me keep the relaunch moving online. Before long, I was staging vacation rentals, family homes, and lived in spaces that needed warmth more than they needed. A performance of wealth. It was smaller in scale than the world my father admired, and stronger in every way that mattered to me. No one here knew the old family hierarchy. No one measured me against Megan. No one looked at my work and heard a little business. In their I was just Brooke. That took some getting used to. For a while, I kept waiting for the old feeling to follow me anyway. That low-grade sense that something ugly was about to enter the room, and I should prepare myself early. A text, a look, a comment disguised as advice, the old instinct to pre-adjust. But distance does something interesting when the problem was never confusion. It removes the constant pressure to reinterpret harm as love. I started seeing my old life with embarrassing clarity. My father had not been harsh. He had been entitled to my compliance. My mother had not been caught in the middle. She had been loyal to comfort over truth. Megan had built a whole personality around staying aligned with power. And Hannah had not been harmless, simply because she was softer. Silence can keep a bad system running just as effectively as cruelty can. Once I named things accurately, I stopped needing my family to agree with me before I could live accordingly. That was the real reframe. For years, I thought healing would arrive when the right person finally admitted what had happened. When my father apologized cleanly. When my mother said she had failed me. When Megan dropped the performance. When Hannah chose honesty early instead of late. But what actually changed my life was much less. I stopped handing my ability to act to people who benefited from my paralysis. That did not make me hard. It made me available to myself again. Now and then, information still found me through a cousin, then an aunt, then one of those accidental updates that are never really accidental. I heard the versions my parents were telling. My father's version was predictable. I had overreacted. My mother's version was softer and somehow worse. She said she did not know what had happened to me, said I had changed, said she missed the daughter who used to care about family, as if what disappeared was my heart and not my willingness to keep offering it where it was mishandled. Megan's version, according to Hannah, was that I had become self-righteous, that I liked being the injured one, because considering I had spent most of my adult life giving away leverage so other people would not feel threatened by it. The thing that surprised me was how little power those stories had once I was gone. Up close, I used to feel responsible for managing every version of me my family created, correcting the record, explaining context, defending tone, smoothing the narrative. Far away, their stories had to stand because once I was no longer there, absorbing the tension, other people started remembering things, who always brought extra chairs to holidays, who stayed late to clean up, who noticed when someone had forgotten a birthday, who handled flowers, food, gifts, rides, reservations, details, who got volunteered before being thanked, who was always described as too sensitive right after saying something true. A couple of cousins reached, not begging for closeness, just honest enough to matter. One sent a short message saying, "I see more now than I used to. I'm sorry. For the times, I let things slide." Another wrote, "You were carrying a lot more than anybody admitted. I did not treat those messages like redemption arcs, but I did register them as evidence. Distance had done what direct confrontation never could. It let the pattern become visible without me standing." Hannah kept reaching out to sometimes to apologize again, sometimes just to ask how the kids were, sometimes to tell me something small and absurd, like the fact that my mother still bought the same brand of candles I used to bring over because apparently no one else remembered which ones she liked. That detail hit me harder than it should have. Not because it made me miss them, because it was such a pure example of the old arrangement. I had been providing memory, texture, continuity, the soft material that made family life feel considered, and they had mistaken that for something replaceable. One rainy afternoon in late October, I was sitting in my office sorting fabric samples while the sky went gray in that steady Pacific Northwest way. And it hit me all at once. Leaving had not been the victory. Seeing clearly had been the victory. The move mattered. The quiet mattered. The new rhythms mattered. But the deepest change was internal. I no longer needed the people who hurt me to validate the fact that they had hurt me. I no longer needed a confession in order to create distance. I no longer needed a family meeting, a perfect apology, or unanimous agreement. before I was allowed to protect my own peace. That was freedom, not the dramatic kind. The adult kind, there was still grief. There were moments, especially in the evening, when I would see something ordinary, a mother helping her grown daughter pick out pumpkins at a market, sisters laughing in a checkout line, a grandfather crouching to zip up a little boy's coat, and feel a flash of loss, so quick and sharp it embarrassed me. Not because I wanted my exact family back, because some part of me would probably always grieve the version of them I kept hoping existed somewhere under people who would have seen me clearly if I had just found is the right words one more time. But hope can become a very expensive habit when you keep placing it in the same hands that have already shown you what they do with it. So when that grief came, I started treating it differently. Not as a sign I had made the wrong decision, as a sign that I had loved beyond what the situation deserved, and that letting go of the fantasy, so did the daily life we were building. Mia coming home from school with dirt on her jeans and a new friend's phone number in her backpack. Noah insisting the backyard was big enough for real adventures. Michael reading at the kitchen table while dinner cooked, looking less tired than I had seen him in years. My own work growing slowly, honestly, without anyone in the background trying to rename it until it fit their ego better. Nothing flashy. That line, I kept finding me. And one night, while I was wiping down the counters after dinner and listening to the kids argue over whose turn it was to feed the dog, I realized something that would have been impossible for me a year earlier. I was no longer building a life in reaction to my family. I was just building a life. That was when I knew the next time I saw them, if I saw them, I would not be meeting them from the old place. Not from hunger. Not from the role they had written for me. From distance, from truth, from a life that no longer needed their approval to feel real. I saw my parents again on a Saturday in late November in the cereal aisle of a grocery store while my son was trying to negotiate for marshmallow-heavy nonsense disguised as breakfast. That felt about right. Not dramatic. Not cinematic. Just ordinary life, which is where the most important things usually happen anyway. Noah was standing holding two different boxes and making a case for why one of them was basically healthy because it had a cartoon bird on the front. I was half listening, half scanning prices, when I heard my name behind me. Not Brooke, the way friends say it. Brooke in the old family tone, familiar in a way that used to make my body brace before my mind had even caught up. I turned. My mother was standing there first. Then my father, half a step behind her. It felt like time folded, not because I wanted it to, because old dynamics live in the body long after the mind has filed them correctly. I noticed little things all at once. My mother looked smaller than I remembered. Not weaker exactly, just diminished somehow. My father had a cane I had not seen before. His jaw was still set, in that same rigid line, but age had reached him anyway. Noah looked up at me. "Mom?" I rested a hand lightly. My mother took a step closer. "Brooke," she said again, softer this time. "We've been trying to reach you." I believed that it just no longer meant what she thought it should mean. They were in town. She said, just for a few days, visiting, and then, almost immediately, she started talking in that breathless way people do when they want to outrun the shape of a conversation before it settles. Maybe this was a sign. Maybe we were meant to see each other. My father said nothing at first. That was almost more unsettling than if he had snapped. Silence with him had always been strategic. He liked to wait for other people to rush in and fill the space. For most of my life, I had, but I was not that woman anymore. I looked at both of them, then at Noah, who had now abandoned in the cereal debate, in favor of trying to understand why my face had gone so still. And with that, the whole moment clarified it was about the future, about what my children would learn if they watched me. Fold myself back into an old shape, just because the people who taught me that shape looked sad enough in fluorescent lighting. My mother's eyes filled. "I know things," got out of hand. She said, "I know your father can be difficult, but we're still family." There it was. The title argument, the emergency exit my family had always reached for when behavior became too ugly. I felt no anger. Hearing it, just distance. "Family," I said, calm enough that even I could hear the difference, is supposed to mean safety too. My mother flinched. My father finally spoke then. And even after all this time, even with age pressing on him from every angle, he still could not quite let go of the belief that authority might save him. "We were trying to keep the peace," he said. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because he had humiliated me publicly, used the whole family as cover, and then spent months minimizing it. My mother had worked herself into tears trying to preserve the image of closeness without ever protecting the person most damaged inside it. Megan had translated cruelty into etiquette. Hannah had apologized, yes, but only after silence had already done its work for too long. And now here they were in the cereal aisle. It's still reaching for the same language. Peace, misunderstanding, as if better wording could somehow erase what the structure had always been. I nodded once. "No," I said, "you were trying to keep control." That landed, I could see it, in my father's face first. Not remorse, recognition, the brief, involuntary look of someone hearing the truth, stated too plainly to sidestep, one hand rising toward her mouth, the way it always did when emotion threatened to make her less composed than she preferred. "Brooke, please," she said, "you can't really mean to do this forever. There are moments when your whole life narrows to one decision: whether to translate yourself back into a language that has always cost you too much, or whether to stay with the truth and let other people be uncomfortable inside it. For you, I would have softened, explained, reassured, left the encounter feeling noble, exhausted, and vaguely ashamed of my own needs. Instead, I stood there with one hand still on my son's shoulder and thought about the version of love I wanted my children to recognize when they were grown. Not love that humiliates, not love that demands access without accountability, not love that treats the most giving person in the room like real love. Love with dignity in it. Love that does not ask you to disappear in order to be allowed to stay. So I told them the only thing that mattered. I don't hate you. I said, but my children are not going to grow up learning that family means control, humiliation, and silence. I won't teach them to beg for scraps from people who only feel comfortable when someone else makes themselves smaller. For a second, everything around us, a cart rolling somewhere behind me, a scanner beeping from the checkout lanes, a child laughing 3 aisles over. My mother was crying, too hard to answer. My father tightened his grip on the cane. And then, because even then, he could not resist reaching for history as leverage, he said, "We were your family." I looked at him for a long second. Yes. I said, and that's exactly why it mattered so much. That was the end of it. Not because there was nothing left to negotiate. I took Noah's hand and started pushing the cart away. Neither of them followed me. My mother called my name once, softly, but even that sounded different. Tomenau. Smela. Unable to command in the same part of me anymore. When we got outside, the air was cold enough to sting a little. Noah climbed into the back seat and immediately asked the question I knew. I shut his door gently and stood there for a second before walking around to the driver's side. They're people from my old life. I said when I got in, he accepted that with the easy trust children sometimes have when they know more is there, but can also feel that now is not the time. Then he asked if we were still getting the bird cereal. I laughed. Absolutely not. He groaned, and just like that, the spell of the encounter broke. By the house looked the way home should look. Warm kitchen light in the windows. Mia's backpack dropped just inside the door, where she had clearly forgotten to hang it up. Michael visible through the glass, reading something at the counter, while water boiled on the stove. Ordinary peace. Not polished, not performative, not staged for anyone else's approval, just ours. That night, Michael and I sat on the back porch with blankets over our laps and the kind of tired that comes from a full day, not an emotionally chaotic one. He looked over at me and asked, "How was the store?" I smiled a little. Eventful. He waited. I told him what happened. not every word, just the shape of it. My mother crying, my father still trying to hold on to authority. The sentence about the kids, the way I walked away and did not feel in the old collapse afterward. Michael listened, then nodded once. How do you feel? I looked out at the dark yard for a second. Before answering, clear, I said, and that was the truth. Not triumphant. Not vindicated. In some huge cinematic way. Clear. That was what I had wanted all along. Even before I knew how to name it. Not revenge. Not humiliation returned. Not a dramatic moment where the whole family finally confessed everything in perfect language and handed me the closure. I thought the clarity to see what love had cost me there. The clarity to stop paying for it. The clarity to build something better. Before my children learned the wrong lesson from watching me endure it, for a long time, I thought the most painful thing my father ever did was send that text and tell me not to come to my mother's birthday. I was wrong. The most painful thing was smaller and older than that. It was the role underneath it. The expectation that I keep helping, keep making things beautiful for people who only valued me most when I was quiet enough to use. The text just forced me to stop pretending I did not see it. And once I saw it, I could not unknow it. Some families teach you how to belong. Others teach you what belonging should never require. Mine taught me that love without dignity is not love. It taught me that peace is not the same thing as keeping powerful people comfortable. And it taught me that sometimes the cleanest thing you can do is stop returning to the place that only knows how to welcome the version of you that disappears. My father thought shutting me out of one dinner would put me back in line. What it actually did was show me there had never been a line worth getting back. I stopped offering access where there was no care. And in the space that left behind, I built something quieter and truer, a home, a business, a marriage, a life my children can grow inside without learning that love and humiliation are related. That is the part I hold on to now. Not the text, not the grocery store, not even the grief, just the truth that came after all of it. I was never asking for too much